Well, thank you so much for the kind words of introduction. Um, well, I think we learn all the time. So even though you said what you said, I must admit that every single day I learn a lot with my students, with my fellow colleagues, and other members of ASHRAE in Singapore and elsewhere in the big ASHRAE family that Tom alluded to. And that's the beauty of ASHRAE. We get together in a community where we learn all the time, and it's really wonderful. Before I get started with the presentation, let me just thank the chapter here, ASHRAE Helmi chapter, for extending this invite to me to participate and present as part of the DL presentation. And it's my pleasure to be here. First time in Greece. I've been in Greece and Athens less than 24 hours. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here and share this presentation. And the topic is decoupled ventilation strategies for enhanced indoor air quality, demand cooling, and demand ventilation. Probably the two key words that you see here is something that most of you in the audience are familiar with, and I have a slightly different take on it, and we'll see as we go along. And in fact, I'm very grateful to Tom for being the first speaker, because he laid the foundation very well for me to build on, and he had a very good overview presentation. Mine's a very focused one on a very specific aspect that he mentioned: people. At the end of the day, we have buildings, energy efficient buildings for people. That's really what matters. As Tom said, I do this as part of my DL topics, and since this is not exactly a DL presentation per se, I just would like to acknowledge that it is part of something that comes from the ASHRAE CDDC as part of a program that we go over to different chapters to share our experience or our knowledge, and in the process we gain something from the audience as well. So let me just start off with this key word that you see here, which is basically talking about this energy efficient, healthy buildings. And this is a keyword that I found very useful to start at any point in time. We have buildings that need to be energy efficient, yes, but we are talking about those buildings for the people, for the occupants who use these buildings for a variety of purposes. And these words, thermal comfort, indoor air quality, energy, greenhouse gas reduction, some important criteria or objectives that we keep in mind. And it's not just at the design stage, we need to take it all the way through and the final operation stage, and finally to its renewal or redevelopment if it comes to that. And it's a journey, it's a process that we can't ignore at any point. And I think increasingly just a mention of this whole process of integrated design, we are coming right ahead in the whole process. We are trying to understand how should the building be operated. So the whole idea of getting building managers, facilities managers engaged in the conversation right up front is something that's really catching on, certainly in Singapore and most of the parts of the world, where we are engaging all stakeholders right from the beginning. So with that very broad kind of a background to my presentation, which is about energy efficiency and about systems, air conditioning systems, that we could be looking at in terms of improving the comfort, the air quality, and acceptability of the occupants, and also address the energy equation in the process. I come very specific to my topic, which was about decoupled ventilation. And a lot of you in the audience would have heard about dedicated outdoor air systems, something that we are talking about in the context of improving the overall performance. As I go through my presentation, you'll get a very clear feel for why I say certain things. It's always keeping the occupants in mind as the main objective, the main criterion. If we can take care of people's needs in the most efficient manner, that's really the kind of fundamental question I'm trying to answer here. So when it comes to indoor air quality, and we use ventilation as a means of providing that good air quality, minimizing contaminant exposure, nothing works better than the concept of dedicated outdoor air system. The idea here is we separate the ventilation part from the cooling. The moment we do that, tremendous possibilities open up. We could now be looking at ventilation and cooling in more than one ways. Typically, we are talking about the same HVAC system being used for both of these twin objectives. In some climates, it becomes extremely challenging, like the place where I come from, Singapore, the tropics. We guarantee 365 days of high humidity. I was talking to someone yesterday and said, that's something I can guarantee in Singapore. In fact, if at all we have any semblance of cold or winter, it's inside our buildings. It's inside our air-conditioned buildings. Buildings can be overcooled. I have another topic on that as another DL presentation, overcooled buildings. So in certain climates like the tropics that I'm talking about, we would be looking at a lot of benefit when we separate the two. So what exactly is the dedicated outdoor air system? We take outdoor air, condition it, filter it, cool it, dehumidify it, or if it's the opposite, heat and humidify, as the case may be, and supply it to the occupied zones. The moment we do that, we could be looking at providing, my focus and my kind of perspective will be cooling and dehumidification, as we would do in the tropics. We could be looking at background cooling being achieved by other means. That's the whole idea. You separate the ventilation from the cooling. You could be looking at something like combining a DOAS concept with chilled ceiling. I'm sure all of you would have heard about this, radiant cooling panels. Chilled beam is another concept that we are talking about, where we separate the sensible cooling part of what we need to do in the buildings or in the occupied zones. So DOAS with chilled ceiling, DOAS with chilled beam. Here I'm taking the concept of a high-rise building, and that's another thing we have in Singapore and lots of urban cities. We have a lot of high-rise buildings. And when we are talking about environmental control in those buildings, there are certain concepts which become central to the whole building. Like we have concepts like you take an outside air infrastructure, system infrastructure, and supply it to the various floors, various occupied zones in the floors. So the green line that you see here is the DOAS supplying ventilation air, and then we have the chill ceiling, chill panel, chill beam panels providing central cooling. So this is a kind of a typical DOAS concept that we're going to be talking about. Notice one thing though, for the ventilation part, we are almost always having to do with very low chill water supply temperatures, 6, 7, 8 degrees Celsius. And if you're talking about chill ceiling, chill beams, we need a much higher temperature, that it needs to handle the central cooling. One of the big concerns we would have with chill ceiling in tropics is condensation, which we want to avoid at any cost. And that's one of the challenges, although I'm talking about this as a concept, it's a very big challenge that we need to address and overcome in buildings. In Singapore and a lot of cities in the Southeast Asian context, we have for a long time, not just in recent times with green buildings and this whole push towards trying to do a better job in terms of providing outside air, we have had this concept of what we would call just taking the outside air from a building's rooftop and do some amount of cooling and dehumidification and then supplying it to the local or floor level air handling units. It's a very common system that used to be prevalent, still is in some of the buildings. My only, I would say, reservation is this unit doesn't do a complete cooling and dehumidification. That's something like, I would say, 50% to about 70% of what you actually need to do. And with that, there is an expectation that these units here, the floor level air handling units, need to handle further dehumidification. Now, the biggest problem that we have in cooling and dehumidification is it's easy to cool. It's much simpler to cool. When you want to dehumidify, that's the biggest challenge. Now think about it. You want to cool and dehumidify in the correct proportion in which the cooling loads exist. So in other words, I don't want to overcool and then get the moisture out. I want to cool to the right off-coil temperature and still be able to get maximum dehumidification. And these are basically problems that I'm alluding to when we do not handle the latent cooling requirements in the right way. So this is, in my view, a better strategy, where we would have the outdoor air handling unit at the rooftop doing the complete cooling and dehumidification, and we mix that after the floor air handling unit. In other words, the floor level AHU pretty much becomes like a sensible cooling air handling unit. Decoupled entirely, not like the one I described earlier, where it doesn't do a complete job. In our group, we are three of us. We've been working in this area since the early 90s, in indoor air quality, comfort, the problems associated with that in the tropics. So we have done some development, some research and development in our group. So we come up with this system called the single coil twin fan air conditioning and air distribution system, where the idea is to be able to have the outside air and the recirculated air not being mixed in an air handling unit. And it goes through a cooling coil that is kind of contiguous. The chill water goes from one compartment to the other and vice versa, just like what would happen in a typical air handling unit. But these two air streams don't mix within the AHU. And we also distribute them in the same two separate air streams and in the local space, an occupied zone. We have a kind of a modified variable air volume box. And notice what's happening here. We have a local zone-specific temperature and CO2 sensor. The temperature sensor controls the recirculated air. This is for cooling. And the CO2 sensor controls the outside air. So the idea of demand ventilation being taken right up to the individual occupied zone. Compare this with what happens in a typical demand ventilation system. You would place a CO2 sensor in the air handling unit, return air, and that is going to be an aggregate, an average of what's happening in all the zones. Now, there are implications. We know for a fact that all the occupied zones don't behave in the same manner. Some zones may have high latent load, more occupants, some may have less, and this is a dynamic process. So wouldn't it be better if we took the demand ventilation concept right up to the occupied zone? That's the spirit of what we are trying to do here. So this is just a simple animation that showed that the two air streams don't mix. We transport them separately, and the mixing actually happens in the occupied zone based on the local demand. Now what does that do? Psychrometrically, we handle the outside air, pull down to the right temperature and humidity, and this part here, recirculated air only for cooling. And this is mixed at each zone depending on what the loads are. Does that save energy? Sure it does. And how do we compute this energy saving? For the simple reason that we don't need to take any more outside air than absolutely necessary. It's on demand at all times based on what the occupant needs are. If you look at 62.1, I've been in 62.1 for more than 10 years now, I'm still part of the committee there. If you follow the multi-zone variable air volume design, you got to ensure that in the worst case scenario, what's called the critical zone load, which is a not so hot day, overcast condition, you have other spaces not having high occupancy demand, but you got that one seminar meeting or conference room that's fully occupied. It's going to require a high level of ventilation air, percentage of ventilation air. If we try to do it single duct VAV system, it's a challenge. We can't do that until we would have over-designed it to begin with, so that at the part load operation, the percentage numbers kind of roughly balances for what you need. So it's a challenge. So the idea of trying to do demand ventilation in multi-zone system is a challenge, and our system is really, in a way, kind of a response to that big challenge, and say, can we do demand ventilation taking to occupied zones? I just put this whole thing in the same kind of a high-rise concept that I took earlier for the chill ceiling and the other DOAS concept. We do not need an air handling unit for high-rise buildings. This is typically the design concept for Singapore anyway. We have a central kind of outside air infrastructure at the rooftop. It supplies the ventilation air to be fed to the local air handling unit. And this is now a single coil twin fan AHU. The green line is ventilation, the red line is cooling, and it mixes in different ways in the various VAB boxes in the zones. Now, that was a concept. We did it in the lab. We were happy. We got the result that we were looking for. Does it work in the real world? And we said, okay, let's try and see if we can put it in a real building. And we were successful to get a grant from our local office, the Prime Minister's office. They had this concept. Well, you got a great idea. You think it's fantastic. Come, let's try and see if we can test better. We'll grant you, give you some funding. Let's see if we can test better. We managed to convince them, got this grant, managed to convince one of our new buildings coming up on our campus. It was installed and commissioned in 2005. It was our own university hall, administration building. And the project team said, why should we even consider your concept? They said, okay, you got a floor area of 2,750 square meters. You're going to consider 2 air handling units in the same area of your AHU room with 1 unit will give you what we are saying we can. And that's the way we convinced them, and we had the grant. So they said, okay, I don't have to pay extra money to begin with anyway, but let's try it out. So we did this, installed it. This open plan space, you see a lot of them, some rooms up towards the end, and that's where the unit is. We did some measurements. CO2 level, well below the threshold limit value of 1,000 parts per million. We had this TVOC, the volatile organic compounds, and this is carbon monoxide. This is certainly not an issue, but TVOC could be an issue in a lot of buildings. I mean, I'm not going into details of that. Notice what's happening. Every time in the morning when the system turns on, we notice that the pull down load of the contaminant was done at a much faster rate than you would do with one single duct kind of a design concept. The reason being, we are pumping outside air right separately into the various occupied zones. So we noticed that the ventilation air was reaching the occupied zones at a much faster rate, at a better rate perhaps, than other conventional designs. Temperature, humidity, exactly what was being designed for, what the occupants wanted in terms of their preference. And we had good positive feedback from the facilities manager, looking after this as part of a university facilities division. They noticed that the return air coming into the air handling unit was always considerably drier in terms of the RH level compared to what their experience in other building AHUs have been. It just meant that the overall humidity control in this AHU and in this space was that much better compared to other conventional designs. That was 2005. The system is still running. The building is still in operation. We have almost always positive feedback on the building. We tried another test case. This was a zero energy building that we, when I say it's not just our group, that Singapore developed as a retrofitted zero energy building. And we were kind of successful in trying to get this concept in for consideration here, a single quality fan system, and it was installed in this building. This is a 3-story building, 2/3 air conditioned, 1/3 non-air conditioned or naturally mechanically ventilated. And all the air conditioning that was used for this retrofit design was based on the SEKHAR or single quality fan concept. Now, I'm showing you a very, very summarized result from this particular measurement and study. The red line is the recirculated air, the cooling, the sensible cooling part of it. The blue line is what you would do if you had a fixed outside air with not much of a possibility of control in terms of demand ventilation. The green is the SEKHAR demand ventilation concept. This is a library building, library space in that building. Notice in this part of the day, when the occupancy was low, the system used less airflow, ventilation airflow. When the occupancy picked up, it went up, and then it came down, which was following the conventional trend as well. So we were able to pick up more ventilation when you need it, and reduce it when you do not need it, and that's what translated into energy savings. And we documented it. These are all based on measurements and some comparison with what would have been the operation here if we had used a conventional strategy. So anywhere between 5% to about 30%, depending on the different types of units and occupancy that those occupied spaces were going to be involved in. Let me now go on to another concept or strategy, which again is increasingly becoming popular. You may have heard about this concept called pass ambient systems. In other words, can we have a concept where you bring in ventilation just to ventilate the person's space, immediate space, rather than ventilating the whole volume of space with the same quantity and quality? We're talking about two things, quantity and quality. That's the key word that I would like to address here. Personalized ventilation is a concept where you bring the outside air, conditioned outside air, directly to the person's breathing zone and be able to control that microenvironment. The logic here being, if you are able to provide good microenvironment, you don't really have to be too concerned about what's the quality of air 2.5, maybe 3 meters above in the space. Seriously speaking, in this room, we wouldn't be too concerned what's the quality of air up there, above the lights, the luminaires that you're seeing here. Not really of a concern to the person as an occupant in the space. So the idea of microenvironmental control is the basis of what we are talking about, personalized ventilation. So again, it's decoupled, bring ventilation directly to the person, provide it in the right quantity and the right quality. So we started off with this concept quite some time back, almost 15 years ago, and we have the primary outdoor air unit. This only handles the outside air. This is a conventional recirculated air handling unit. So the outside air is brought directly to the person from under the floor. One concept that we tried a couple of other concepts as well. And the cooling air can come from the top as in a conventional ceiling supply distribution system, or it can even come from under the floor, or you can have a displacing ventilation, whatever it might be. We have decoupled the ventilation from the background cooling. So we did this as part of series of several studies. We have environmental chamber facilities in our group, in our department. We have those capabilities. We built up the infrastructure and we did some of this research. So here I'm talking about a desk-mounted personalized ventilation system, which is integrated with a ceiling supply mixing ventilation system. This is what it is. We are talking about a facility where we did this experiment. I'm just giving you a quick snapshot of how we do these experiments. We engage people. In all our studies, typically we need to do both objective measurements and subjective measurements. We don't just measure with instrument and say it works. Of course, we show that it works that way, but we also show that people like it. So subjective response is an integral part of all that we do here. The experimental protocol is pretty elaborate. I won't go into full details. We measure the background temperature, we measure the personalized environment temperature, how much ventilation we use for different experimental conditions, how do the people express their satisfaction or dissatisfaction, and we use tracer gas measurements, and a very important part of our strategy in terms of quantifying the performance of ventilation system. We use this to compute ventilation effectiveness. Some other research groups used in Europe, I think you talk about air exchange effectiveness. They are synonymous. They are pretty much similar kind of concepts that are used to demonstrate how good the quality of air distribution is. It's not so much how much ventilation rate we take, that's important, yes, but how effective is it in reaching the occupant's breathing zone. That's probably even more critical, and that's ventilation effectiveness. So quickly, some results from that particular initial research. Ventilation effectiveness versus different experimental conditions. What you see here is that's background temperature, ambient temperature in the room elsewhere. That is the personalized air temperature, and 15 is the liters per second per person. We try 15 and 7 as two comparative kind of ventilation rate. And look at what's happening to ventilation effectiveness. Every time we use the personalized ventilation, like over here, the effectiveness is way above 1, which is what you would get in conventional mixing ventilation system. This is not revelation. This is what we designed for. This is what we get. Our measurement just confirmed that what we designed for is achieved in practice. I had personally been involved in measurements with conventional ceiling supply mixing ventilation system in probably about close to 100 buildings over the last 2 decades in Singapore. This number, we have never gone beyond that. 1.45, 0.95 in that vicinity. But with personalized ventilation systems, 1.5, 1.4 and above. And that's good. If the ventilation effectiveness increases, it helps us to save energy because you can do the same job with less ventilation rate. And indeed, in 62.1, in ASHRAE 62.1, we are now trying to see if we can bring in this design concept of personalized ventilation as probably another option to improve the indoor air quality in the spaces. What did the people say? They liked it. About here means it's more acceptable. Thermal comfort. People liked it with personalized ventilation system. What did they say about air quality acceptability? Again, they liked it. It's in line with what they felt about the comfort. So obviously those who were exposed to the environment did like the personalized ventilation system providing them the environmental control. Now I'll skip this slide in view of the time constraint right now. So what's the concept here? If we increase the ventilation to the person, it helps. People like it better. When you work with lower temperature, 23 degrees as opposed to 26 degrees for the personalized air, the lower temperature is better. Tom mentioned that too. When you reduce from 28 to 25, there are positive benefits. And certainly, the lower temperature, at least in the facial region, in the immediate microenvironment, the facial region, which is a direct response to how we perceive the environment, is better. And we were also able to save energy. And where did the energy saving come from? Think about it. If I worry about the microenvironment in terms of temperature, comfort, and air quality, and not worry so much about the background air, I can let the air temperature stratify. 27, 28 degrees, I don't care. I'm never going to be up there. My nose is never going to be breathing the air from there. It's all about the microenvironment. If we can design systems, make it work in that manner, we save energy. And personalized ventilation systems do have that potential to help us save energy. In the same zero energy building, we tried the personalized ventilation as well in one of the occupied space, office space. There you go. The air exchange effectiveness with PV systems, almost always more than 1.6. With the conventional systems, it's 1.1 in this case, we're able to measure, but certainly distinctly different and better compared to conventional systems. So we had ceiling mounted, like in an aircraft. You have those nozzles up in the ceiling panel. We said, why can't we try supplying ventilation air that way? Yes, we did a series of studies, a CFD simulation. We started off with that. The idea is to get the personalized air directly to the person and background air for the cooling. So again, we found this is our experimental facility where we did that. These are the ceiling supply, personalized ventilation, these nozzles here, and then we have the background from ceiling supply or the underfloor. If you increase the PV airflow, it helps, people like it. Again, the last strategy that we tried, which I want to share with you here, desk-mounted PV, the PV is kept on the table, and then we integrate that with the underfloor system. Because we do know underfloor systems have the potential to stratify the environment, we can save energy, but is that good for indoor air quality? When we compared, when we integrated with personalized ventilation system, the story was very positive, very, very positive. And here it is, this is the desk-mounted PV. Looks a little bit crude, and that's because that's all the funding we get to make it look sophisticated. That's not very aesthetically pleasing, I would imagine, but the concept is established. People could move it up or down, sideways, who's sitting in front of it, and that this person can move this. He has the potential to change it. And we use the background system coming from the underfloor air distribution system. My last slide to convey a technical message. Acceptability of perceived air quality, what the person says, he feels good, he likes it. Perceived inhaled air temperature, meaning if it is cool, you say, you indicate it down here. If it is hot, it goes up there, and that is fresh is up here, and stuffy, stale is down here. Now, mind you, don't interpret this as degrees Celsius, that's not what it is, it's a perception. If it's cool, I would indicate my response would be lower here. Let's look at the inhaled air temperature. When they perceive the temperature to be cooler, their acceptability increases. In line with what was mentioned by Tom, in line with several other studies that we have done, people in the tropics especially like that temperature is slightly cooler than thermal neutrality. They don't like it warm, but they like it slightly cooler. And that's exactly what we find from that particular experiment. inhale air freshener, when they perceive it to be fresh, that's this line. As they perceive it to be fresher and fresher, the acceptability increases. Now we get all that from personalized ventilation system. Because up here, in this part of this chart, we're talking about conditions being achieved with personalized ventilation strategy integrated with underfloor air distribution system. So the quick key findings of that particular study was people don't have cold feet that normally we associate with underfloor systems sometimes. We could raise their background temperature, but we provide that good air quality by managing how we distribute the ventilation air to the person's immediate breathing zone. So finally, my last few points or key messages that I would like to convey here. Again, this is something that we shouldn't forget, shouldn't ignore. Energy efficiency is important. I'm all for it. All of us are for it. But let's not forget, it's the people in the buildings. It's the people's comfort. It's the people's acceptability of air quality. With all of that, they perform better. Then your bottom line just improves, even from an economic consideration. There's a whole sort of research that presented about benefits economically of increasing or improving indoor air quality. Now, it took us, my colleagues and I, something like 20 over years to get this message across to our authorities in Singapore, and now we are heartened. We are pleasantly, once it's surprised. We knew the time had to come, the right time had to come. Today, in our rating system for high-performing buildings, called the Green Mark rating system, something similar to LEED and BREEAM that you have in Europe, we have increased the weightage being given to indoor environmental quality. And this, the way we see it, is only going to improve and increase in the future. So the idea is the whole notion of green buildings not just being driven by energy, but being integrated with air quality, the health aspects of the occupants is being well received and well embraced in our rating systems. I talked to you about the dedicated outdoor air system, the single core twin fan as one of the concepts embracing the DOAS strategy. Then in the distribution systems, what I would like to urge you to consider is the benefit that one can get when you decouple the ventilation from cooling, and even better, let's get the ventilation right up to the person's breathing zone where we can. It may not be possible in all design solutions, but certainly there are cases, there are places where it would work, and we should be well aware of the benefit that we get from that. And with that, I conclude, and thank you again for your invitation, and thanks again for inviting me to be here this morning. Thank you.